Data Storytellers, you're joining us roughly 20 minutes into the conversation with Albert Mangahas from Turo. So, Albert and I had some great conversations in the past couple of months, and we agreed that it would be beneficial and a worthy endeavor to capture some of that in some clearly articulated ideas to share with the Data Storytellers community and with the whole corporate business analytics community, the entire business community, really, right? Now I'm hearing also that the kind of people also who listen to the Data Storytellers, a lot of them are just business folks who say, oh, finally I get it. Finally I understand analytics. I did not get analytics before. This is super helpful, right? They were not the intended audience, but they are here with us. So, so with that said, Albert, welcome on the show.
Thanks so much, Laz, for having me. Super excited to be here. And again, super excited to talk about data.
Well, always. So before we talk about data, there's a lot to talk about, and from a lot of cool angles that we already touched on, but we just had to press the record button with no further hesitation. Before we roll into that, Turo. So you are the chief data officer at Turo. But both the role itself, the chief data officer, it became a thing in the past 10 years, right? And its role and meaning is evolving. It's a fascinating story to witness. So can you just tell us a little bit about your role and also the organization Turo, and I'll follow up with some questions around them.
Sounds good. Yeah, I feel super privileged to be the chief data officer here at Turo. And again, depending on who you ask, I'm sure you'll get a million different responses on the role of the chief data officer and how it's kind of evolved over the past few years. But specifically at Turo, I think at its core, data drives nearly everything we do at the company. And it's something that we found so incredibly important and so incredibly kind of like foundational to the things that we're doing is that we decided creating an actual formal data organization made a lot of sense, and such that it wasn't part of engineering, or sometimes it's part of finance, or all these different structures. Having the data team as its own organization allowed us to kind of think about how are we leveraging data across the entire company, and how are we thinking through that really thoughtfully. And so as the leader of the team, I do have three separate teams that I oversee within the data organization, data science being one of them, which is really focused around machine learning and thinking about a lot of the different predictive models that we're building that power our products. We also have our data analytics team, which is really partnering with a lot of business users and trying to really connect the dots between business and data. And then last but certainly not least is our data engineering team, which is really thinking about how do we build, store, and analyze all this data at scale. And so that's effectively, we wouldn't have our data analytics team or data science team without having our incredible data engineering team to kind of build that foundation. And so the combination of all these three teams allows us to then partner with so many different stakeholders across our organization to be able to, again, allow them to make data-driven decisions as quickly as possible. So
also now you gave me a whole other set of topics that maybe we'll need to like switch the direction of the conversation, but hopefully not for too long. So I'm also, again, because you're catching me in that spot that I told you before. So you have like a fresh perspective with a lot of thoughts. I'm in the middle of the series of discussions with our board of advisory members, right. around all these playbooks of making data a success in the business. Right? Mm-hmm. And there's many, many good stories, some super old organizations like Caterpillar or Emerson. So where data has, just because some of these businesses are a century old, data analytics, it's not something that has been a part of the DNA of the organization. Right. And then you have some maybe newer financial institutions, you have maybe some newer manufacturers, franchise businesses like restaurants. Right? We had a great story that we just captured from Dairy Queen, from Lance Goldsmeyer, who's also a board of advisory member and is coming to Nashville as well with the data, almost a Data Queen story, the Dairy Queen story of what they've done. Right. And so with this Turo, is neither of these, right? So Turo is one of those newer businesses, So I know
Mhm.
because we work with many of them. I mean, we have some of the cutting edge streaming services, right? Like, for example, I'm actually not going to give that away just now, but you can just listen
Yeah.
to some of the podcasts, right? Like Disney Plus or Warner Brothers, HBO Max, like all these, like we've kind of have access to. But Turo is a very interesting spot because we never, let's say, worked with Netflix or Airbnb before, right? And the
Mhm.
reason being is that they are just too distant from
Mhm.
most of the realities of the companies, right? Because they were born in data and they are about, I mean, Netflix there's an argument to be made that Netflix is not a streaming service, it's a data company. Again, these are some of these, cheeky, kind of tongue-in-cheek, provocative statements, but okay, there's a case to be made there, at least.
Right.
Is Turo like that? Is Turo one of these businesses where data is basically like part of the package, or what is the relationship between data and Turo? And maybe you can just explore what Turo is through that lens as well.
Yeah, I'd say that first and foremost, I would definitely say that data is 100% part of the DNA here at Turo, and part of it is that at its core we are obsessed with our customers, and to be obsessed with customers, you have to be driven by the data from customers and everything else around that to be able to provide the best experience, and so. That's kind of at the heart of what we're doing. And so, whether it's qualitative data to quantitative data, we're using all of everything and anything that we have to create the best experience possible. Um, and maybe to kind of take a step back, just for any of the listeners or viewers here that don't know what Turo is, I can kind of just give a quick overview of Turo. You had mentioned it as kind of the Airbnb but for cars. The way I think it through this is that we're really pioneering like a new category transportation, and
Mm.
really revolutionizing the car rental industry. Car rental, is usually associated with long lines. You're stuck at this rental counter. It's generic. It's unpredictable. You think you're getting one car, you get another car, or worst case, you don't even get a car. Um, and the way that Turo works, it's the world's largest peer-to-peer car sharing marketplace. So as a traveler or a guest, as we call it, someone looking for a car, you're actually renting someone from the local area their actual car. And so what's great about this is that Turo offers this extraordinary selection of over 1,500 makes and models. So it's not just a compact car or intermediate, whatever that means. You're actually getting the exact car, the exact trim, the exact color that you want to get. And there's so many options. You don't have to. It's not just the high-end options of these amazing Lamborghinis, Ferraris. You can get something as humble as a Honda Civic. Whatever your need is, if you need a 4x4 car to go to the snow, you need a convertible to cruise down for the beach, or if you're like myself and have 4 kids and you need to fit everyone into a car, there's a lot of minivan options, and a lot of our incredible host community offer extras as well, so that you can actually also rent the car seat. I don't have to now pack extra car seats on my travel. I always find hosts that are already offering car seats. It makes the entire trip extremely, extremely convenient. And from that point, from a convenience standpoint, one thing that sets us apart from homes or rentals or apartments is that the cars can actually move. And so one of the features that our host community also offers is delivery. So if you need that car at your hotel or directly to your home, or maybe to a train station or an airport, again, you just coordinate directly with the host, and you can just have a very, very convenient experience. And as everyone who's traveling can be pretty stressful, and transportation is a key component of that. And so having providing a service in a marketplace where guests have a wonderful experience and hosts are actually now monetizing what is typically a depreciating assets and turning into an earnings engine, it's kind of win-win on both sides. So it's super exciting from a product standpoint, and as you can imagine, so many great opportunities from a data standpoint, and why I get excited every day to work on data problems here at Turo.
So this was the most amazing introduction into any company, like on the data storytellers that I've heard, right?
Yeah.
Because it was almost like, when I say well rehearsed, I mean that in the best way. That was that it wasn't right. So it was
Yeah.
just essentially. I just needed to put down a call. So it was that was essentially you going through that as you were pitching the business to an investor. That's how you actually pitch the business to an investor, right? So essentially, you with positioning it as a new category of transportation, which it is. That's exactly what it is. First of all, it allows me to understand fully
Yeah.
what that is, and it's so fascinating. This is like one of those things with also the data storytellers, right? Like actually being able to like articulate what something is in the context of like the larger business is fascinating to me. And it's funny that with this car rental, you're catching me also when I'm just about to go for a 3 week trip. So I'm in the car rental business, and you know how it is, if I'm in for
Yeah.
a longer trip. Yeah, absolutely. So basically, I've been looking at rentals, car rentals across multiple countries of Europe, right? And how to coordinate that, how to coordinate it with multiple sources of, or multiple accommodations, right, across like a larger trip, especially when you have a
Sure.
family. I mean, I don't have a large family. I mean, it's a fastly growing family. That's all I can say. But even now, just planning with one 11-month old, okay, there are all kinds of considerations that go into it, and your options
Hmm.
are limited, and then there are different pickup spots for different rentals. It's a pain. So you guys are solving a very frustrating pain point, right? And it's a win-win for everyone involved. It's a win for the renter, it's a win for the users. That's amazing. And I would love to also go deeper into the Turo story, and how long has it been running, and it's awesome. I just don't know if we would have the time to fully explore that.
Yeah.
But maybe we can look at Turo. You said that okay, data has been an essential and financial part of the organization. Maybe we can go back to when was Turo kind of founded, and then when did it hit that kind of level? But this is already a network, so you guys already established a network, which is huge, right? That's for businesses like Turo. That's the barrier of entry, right? There's no established network, so you kind of have to broker the relationships between the renters and the. It's a tricky business, right? But you guys are
Yeah.
already past
Absolutely.
that point. But maybe we can just look at that evolution so we can get a sense of the timelines and then zoom into data.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we were originally founded back in 2011, and so
Hmm.
it's been some time, but again, we haven't been around as some of these other larger companies for over 100 years or anything like that. But it started off kind of the tale of two cities, as I like to say. We actually were founded in Cambridge on the East Coast, and then very quickly also expanded to San Francisco, being our two kind of our initial key markets. And at the time, slightly different business model. I won't go into all the nitty gritties of it then, but at its core, it was trying to solve that problem where our founder was literally just driving down the streets in Cambridge, needed a car, saw hundreds of cars just parked on the sidewalk, and it's like, wouldn't it be great if I could just drive one of these that aren't being used? And effectively, that hasn't changed. Cars sit underutilized or not utilized 95% of the time. Um,
Hmm.
and why not find a way to be able to utilize this asset and also provide host the ability to then monetize off of that? And so when we started in these two markets, we realized very quickly that launching one city at a time or one market at a time would be incredibly slow, um, and not something that we were looking to do, as we want to grow
Yeah.
faster. And so we actually opened up the entire marketplace across the US to allow hosts to just list their car, and we just kind of organically tried to see what was happening, and we saw some tremendous growth over the years in terms of just allowing that to happen. And we continue to build kind of the business here in terms of continue to grow supply and demand. And this is the art of building a marketplace, is that you can't just build one side of it.
Yeah.
And so there's been a kind of a journey to kind of continue to build both sides. Fast forward to the pandemic in 2020, which took a huge toll in a lot of different industries, the
Wow.
travel
Yeah.
industry specifically. This was something that was very difficult, obviously, in 2020. But what it created, for those that can recall, is that everyone was stuck at home for a year.
Yeah.
Uh, and
Yeah.
so it ended up being this huge surge in 2021 of everyone wanting to travel. And at the time,
Mm.
car rental actually ended up selling a lot of their cars because of just the economy and the state of demand. And this was a unique opportunity for Turo to really step in, and places where people were, for example, in Hawaii, people were renting U-Hauls because they couldn't get a car.
Wow.
I couldn't imagine renting a U-Haul, a truck, just to take my family around. But this is where we saw significant growth in markets like this on Turo, because hosts that already had one or two cars, they started listing their neighbor's car, their grandma's
Yeah,
car,
because it's
their
well, it
friend's
makes
car.
it's awesome. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
so this is incredible because the whole COVID. So the business Turo. I mean, if my math is correct, so you started it in 2011. We're recording in 2024. It's like a 13-year ish span that we're talking about, right?
that's right. Yeah,
And the COVID impacted time, which was during COVID and different phases of COVID and everything
yeah,
that was a huge event. It was probably like the largest single event of our lifetimes, right? I mean, no one can
absolutely.
really. I mean, we're talking, I don't know, Second World War levels of significance, something like that, right? So,
Sure. Yeah,
and for a couple of years in Turo's evolution as a company, that was the state of affairs, and you guys kind of pulled through. So, because it was the stress on every single industry, big pivots needed to take place. Some organizations, and both large companies but smaller companies, just certain types of businesses in certain locations just went out of business, right? And some also managed to pull through, some take advantage of it, right? Or find ways to create value in that environment. And
that's right.
then there was a big surge of people wanting to travel. I do remember, because I never go to conferences. Like, it's just nothing against conferences, I just don't, like, we have our own events that I need to, so I don't really have the space to go, funnily enough, but I'm going to events as just our own, right? But at the same time, I remember that that was the first time they opened up Canada, because I was in Canada, and every country was just like slowly opening up bigger events, right? And to a certain number, now you could go to a conference if you keep it under a certain, right, but it could already
Right.
be like a proper a larger event, and I accept it. Like, I was like, you know what, let me just go, and it's been a while, it's just let's just get into it, so I imagine that a lot of people were traveling during that time. And okay, so with data, you mentioned that data has always been a part of the organization's DNA, right? So
That's right.
um, with that, before we dive into that, and especially the trust piece, and even when we talk about Turo, like the trust barrier, both for Turo and the companies like Airbnb, for example, right? There's a lot that we can talk about there of how the greatest barrier. So creating the network effect, we just talked about it. Okay, if you want to make a company like Turo successful, you got to create that kind of network effect. And
Absolutely.
for that network effect, one of the main barriers, if we just kind of do the same process of breaking down the bottlenecks, is trust. That's it. So if you look at, for example, Airbnb's booking process, it's a masterclass on handling the main objection that people have, whether they know it or not. Whether people know it or not, the main objection that people had. And very interesting today, also, like where Airbnb is going, is the question of trust, right? So for
Hmm.
example, Airbnb already has one element where, look, if I book out a Marriott in 2 months, I can be pretty sure that when I go there, the Marriott will be there with the room for me, right? Especially if I book directly with Marriott. But even if I book through something like Expedia, most probably the room will be there or it will be figured out.
That's right.
With an Airbnb, I mean, that person can cancel on you last minute. I'm not saying that it does happen, but it can happen, right? And
Right.
it does happen sometimes. I mean, human beings are involved, right? So in order to eliminate as much of the rest of the trust barrier, right? Airbnb, even through their visual interface and their messaging and their communication through the booking process, it's a constant reassurance of the protection and the refundability, like like a lot of clarity around these things, right?
That's right.
So for
That's right.
you guys, was there like a trust barrier with Turo and basically people who wanted to rent the cars and all that? And maybe here we can also dive into how data analytics was leveraged to create that healthy ecosystem between the business and its customers and internally within the business. And that's the exciting conversation we're about to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can maybe talk about trust briefly in two different angles here. And maybe before we talk about the demand side or the guest side and this is a really important and interesting topic of, that reliability. If I'm going to book something, whether it's a hotel, an Airbnb, or a car on Turo, you want to know that that car is going to be there.
Mhm.
But interesting. Before we get there, in order for the car to be there, we very early on there was a big challenge because there's nothing like Turo. Marketplaces have existed, but the idea of sharing your personal mode of transportation, your vehicle with a stranger, that part was a scary and a very challenging hill to climb in order to, all right, am I going to give my car to someone I absolutely don't know? And is it going to come back? And all these things and these barriers that we had to kind of build around how do we make sure we are putting the right checks around the right guest? And then for guests, how do we make sure that we're getting them into safe cars and making sure that the highest level of fulfillment, and this is a metric that we track in terms of, our hosts actually that get that request, are they actually fulfilling that trip? And we want that to be as close to 100% as possible. And it's this balancing act of making sure we're building trust on both sides. And so that's been a kind of the journey we've been going on for the past 13 years. And to be able to make strides in both of those, data is the kind of the cornerstone of that. Because in order for us to really identify or understand, again, where hosts are dropping off or why are hosts not fulfilling or canceling last minute, we really have to start digging into some of the data. Is it an experienced host or is it a new host? Is there something that we're happening with different features? Like, are we not giving hosts enough advance notice for that booking? And are they not planning? And are we doing more proactive things? And we've put all these things with data over the years where if we know a host isn't engaged and something as obvious as, hey, they haven't logged in or opened the app recently, why should we let guests book with these hosts? That's putting them in a bad position. And so, again, very proactively just using the data and identifying opportunities of how do we then clean up our supply. Let's even remove that hurdle from the guests completely by then doing our own proactive curation and making sure the supply that we have, all the vehicles that we have, are of the highest quality. That's at least that's the goal. And so there's been a lot of data initiatives there. And then on the guest side, there's so much data that we have in terms of making sure we can see what that conversion and the cancellation rates and understanding all the different behaviors there. There's just a wealth of data. And then the last piece, I know that I can talk hours and hours about all this, is unlike other marketplaces where, okay, I'm booking maybe a hotel or just I'm going to buy something from, an old computer from someone off of Facebook Marketplace or something like that. On Turo, there's one more complicated aspect of physical damage. Well, when you're driving a car, accidents can happen, whether it is the person driving's fault, maybe you park it and someone hits it. Another very complex and can be very expensive component of the Turo business model. And so managing risk is a whole other thing, a very difficult problem because it's a low frequency, high severity problem. And anytime you're doing low frequency, high severity problem, it's difficult. And especially early on the early years when you don't have much data, it's actually hard to solve these problems because the low frequency means you don't have enough data to build off of that. So this is something we had to
identify
be
the
very
signal
creative.
Because there's not enough. Very
exactly. And so you'd have to come up with kind of more, basic type of heuristics early on, and then improve on those heuristics. And then we've gotten to the stage now where we're at the scale where we have more robust predictive models to be able to manage risk in a more real-time fashion. And so it's been exciting to go on that journey. But again, another part of the excitement of data to support our guests, data to support our hosts, and data to support the risk and protection side. It is no shortage of interesting problems.
And also, I'm so tempted, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to shut that line of thought down right now, but I'm going to note it so that maybe in the future we can come back to it. I don't know, virtually or in person, but I would have so many interesting questions, at least interesting for me, about, for example, how insurance comes into play with that. For example, insurance companies, right? How do you reassure the renters and all that it's financially viable, both for Turo, both for the renter, right? It gives clarity, expectations with these low frequency, high severity events, which actually are a great source of anxiety and stress, right? Not just in data, not just in for example, an accident is a low frequency, high severity event, and
that's right.
So that's very interesting to me, but we can't go there. Unfortunately, we'll return to it at some point, right?
Sounds great.
So this is very interesting to me. But let me just then note something there about, I love that example that you brought about using the ability to monitor engagement because it happens on a digital platform. That's inherent to the digital platform that there's easily detectable signal, right? So we also work with Caterpillar. Caterpillar is very, very good at, for example, monitoring their own manufacturing. This is, by the way, public information. There was a great article about this published. Kyle Klein, one of our longtime members and data storytellers, veterans, right, is also in that article. It's publicly available information. Check it out about the cool things that they do, measuring things in manufacturing, right? But traditionally, Caterpillar has not been a data analytics company, and now we're just kind of digitizing something that's not digital. But Turo, the whole platform, is a digital platform, so everything can be measured.
Yeah.
Now, the question is, can you measure it in a meaningful, impactful way, right? And that's the big conversation of data analytics. And just a little tactical, and this is also a storytelling lesson there, which I love in an interesting way, that you use data analytics to identify a lack of engagement with the renters, right? And you use that to create a barrier of entry that actually increased the value of your service and its financial outcomes, both for you and your renters. And it was just that, observing something and implementing a barrier of entry. If you have data analytics capability, you can do this free of cost. It's just, you can do it. Okay, there's some implementation
Absolutely.
there, right? But
Sure.
you can do that. Boom, immense business value. Not just short term, but long term brand for Turo might have been the money shot.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I remember even going through that journey. There was when you're growing a marketplace, especially in the years, it's all about supply. You need to have supply.
Yeah.
So any idea of consciously reducing your supply, it's like, why would you do that? But if data is there to be able to tell you, well, this is unproductive, low quality supply that's just creating a bad experience, it becomes an obvious, very easy decision to make. And we saw a lot of the metrics almost overnight improve because we did this, and we didn't see any revenue loss because they were unproductive, unengaged hosts. And so it was very easy to kind of continue to track that. And now we've made that programmatic, where we're doing that kind of regularly now to be able to curate and keep the highest quality supply we can.
This is one of my favorite examples because it's also like one of those powerful economics 101s that, I mean, even people who studied advanced economics, right? There's a lesson that you kind of forget as you move into your, especially like historical examples too, because this is a historical example, because it's just the fact of the matter is, right, that if you have low supply and high demand, right, then there's a lack of engagement, a lack of profit, but profit in terms of not just financial profit for the service provider, profit for the user in general, right? The value that's created is low, and thus the benefits and the outcomes are usually lower quality as well. And then when you move into an area which has a lower supply, because there's a real need there, that's why there's low supply, right? That's why there's low supply. There's a real need, and you have the high demand. That's where you can hit the value creation sweet spot, right? And use data analytics to do exactly that. So it's like economics one. Let's apply data analytics with a very crude, very powerful tool. When I say crude, I mean it in a good way. It's a crude tool, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Supply demand. That's crude in a beautifully simplistic way. And you apply data analytics, and it was huge strategic and financial reward. How did you measure that? But could you actually measure and track that back, that the improvements back to what you guys have done with this?
When we did this, we didn't launch it like a lot of other things that we do test. We do launch, we do things as an experiment to actually do a more measured approach of the treatment versus control. And in this case, it was, I think, very obvious in terms of just knowing that these were unengaged hosts. They were not fulfilling trips. So it was almost like knowing a guest is going to book this car. They think the host is going to show up, and we're just setting them up for failure. And so this one was just this was the right thing to do. And so we didn't launch it as an experiment.
An easy case to make.
Correct. But we were still able to just measure overall kind of a pre-post, a little bit more rudimentary here, but we were able to very easily track that the fulfillment was solid. Overall utilization and booking volume, everything was still in a positive, if not flat, if not slightly more positive. And so I think this is where it just felt us to reinforce this notion that we just need to constantly push the envelope in terms of quality. And then high quality supply means guests have a better experience, that means they come back, and then that means that we can grow more supply. And again, part of that flywheel that is incredibly important in every marketplace.
So what's fascinating to me about this is that also you using like very in a way like very simple and almost like should be obvious principles, right? But you're keeping a perspective where look, there's this piece of information and then there's the organization and there's a shared sentiment. You need to be aware of that. You need to be aware of where the wind blows, what are the realities of the business, where's the common will, right, of the organization. Where does that lead? If you have information that maybe potentially pushes against that or contradicts that, but you do have the obligation, professional and almost like a moral obligation, to kind of assert that reality or that idea. Assert, when I say assert, is that introduce it to the flow of narratives within the business, right? If it's a difficult message, then you need to treat it in a specific way. If it's a message that's actually closer to what everyone wants to do, then you can have an easy win. So this sounds like to me that was an easy, big leverage win. And so with this, it's a really cool example of it. So before we dive into that, your role, you said, so maybe we can take a snapshot at your team in terms of like how the organization is structured, as much as, again, we won't be able to go too deep into it, but organizational structures are actually a huge topic this year, the Data Storytellers community. Nicole Coolidge from Emerson just came on the podcast, right, who explained their transformation of how data has been embedded in the business, right, the teams, the relationships with those. I mean, Emerson is an old company. She's been there for 20 years. So she kind of saw, she was at the forefront of that. And she will also present that story in Nashville. By the time people listen to this, it might be already Nashville. I don't know. We'll see the release schedule. But it's a super interesting topic. And you already started kind of outlining the teams that you have. So maybe we can take a snapshot of that. And in the process, maybe we can also go into a brief exploration of how you see these categories of business data and analytics, everything from data management and data architecture and infrastructure and BI and analytics and data science. Just a brief, because I like to kind of dig into that from the perspective of our board of advisors, since there's no established gospel on this. So with that, yeah, maybe we can just talk about a little bit the data teams at Turo.
Yeah, happy to. So yeah, as I shared earlier, we have three different data functions or data teams of data science, data analytics, and data engineering. With that said, I think this is what's interesting, and I think there's a lot of ways to kind of articulate this, whether it's the spoken wheel kind of structure. But at the end of the day, the way that we found it to be the most successful is that a lot of our data teams need to be well integrated with our stakeholder teams. And so product development is a big one of our biggest stakeholders. Marketing, finance, analytics, or finance and accounting, I should say, are just other examples, but the list goes on and on. But the way that we've kind of structured the data analytics, data science, data engineering team, where applicable, we try to actually have representation from each of those three teams, data analytics, data science, and data engineering, supporting a function. And so whether that's, again, for our host team or our on the demand side or risk and protection, these are just three different themes that I talked to just moments ago. We do have data analysts, data scientists, and data engineers that are focused on each of these areas. And I think that what that's proven to be successful is that then you're building not only the subject matter expertise of whether that's demand or supply or risk and protection, but then you're actually have now the three different skill sets of data analytics, data science, data engineering working very closely together, and everyone playing to their strengths. Certainly early years, everyone was wearing many hats, but as we've been able to scale, that's been able to then prove where you can really lean into someone's appropriate skill set here, so that we do have a very robust, healthy data pipeline of making sure we have the highest data quality coming into our training data sets, for example, before we build the models. And then how do we have a structure to be able to analyze that? And we have our data analytics team kind of come in to be able to do a lot of that analysis before, during, and after we launch new features. And so that's been incredibly exciting to kind of see that transition from a very humble, very small size team where everyone was doing everything to building, again, because we've been able to build trust over the years through this data. That's allowed us to then invest in the data team more. And I think that's where, again, hard to do when you're just maybe at some companies you have a team of 5 people on the data team. There's only so much you could do with a team of 5, but you'll a lot of impactful things. But as we've been able to scale from that team of 5 to now close to 60 folks, there's a lot more that we've been able to do. And there's a lot more that we can be doing. And I think it's now all about prioritization, which is, again, another topic that we can talk about. But yeah, that's how we're structured. But it's something that we're excited that it's been working for us, and we're looking to continue to kind of scale our teams accordingly so that we can be as impactful as possible.
And it's always something where you can always make good better, good great, and great exceptional.
Exactly.
Right? Actually, so
Exactly.
one of the layers of the data storytellers conversations I enjoy is those, because there are many layers, right? So for example, we have a track which is like extremely human conversations about managing high performance teams, right? Everything from emotional intelligence and like all that, right? Then we also have a track which is around, let's say, the organizational models, right? That which we, for example, the Nestle Purina example with their bee and hive version of the Wheel Spoke, fascinating case studies, right? So there's that layer, and then we also have a conversation which is more about the tools of how you make something like that happen, like continuous improvement. I mean, talk about continuous improvement, right? That's a thing. Continuous improvement. For people, I'm sure people heard about Lean and Six Sigma, right? Especially in manufacturing. Like Toyota was famous for it, and I just happen to know because I worked for a brief time, like very close to manufacturing excellence like our brand, the Data Leaders brand that we sold in 2020, was working alongside manufacturing leaders, which I've just had like very close oversight on, right? So I kind of understood that, wow, this is a fascinating area of how Toyota actually implemented lean methodologies, what lean is, what continuous improvement is. And I always like that story, like to remember it and tell that story of, that's where I learned that Toyota openly welcomes all of their competitors in their production plants. I mean, that was definitely the case for decades. I don't know if it's the case anymore. Definitely that was a big deal, that the manufacturers from BMW, we brought BMW to Toyota. We brought the VP of Manufacturing Excellence of BMW to the Toyota plant to look around. And Toyota was, hey, come. And then those companies like BMW and all that's the most like secure, like a lot of secrecy around it. But Toyota is so good at what they do with it that they don't need to be worried about that, because they're just so ahead of the pack with lean. They are lean, right?
Yeah.
And that methodology is a fascinating framework that we actually explored with Brian Bolzer on the podcast already, who's the EVP of Digital Business Transformation at G&J Pepsi, who's also a Lean Six Sigma black belt. And he's an extremely impressive guy, and we talked about how those principles apply in data analytics leadership, and he's actually coming to a round 2, so he's also a board of advisor member. So like lots of good stories there, right? So with that, as you're trying to improve your organizational design as well, that's the very conversation of the data storytellers. And I'm kind of proud of ourselves, because we are kind of at the 37-minute mark, and we can finally look at the actual playbook, right? Which I kind of expected it would be that split. I told you in advance, and I think we're kind of arriving well. We had to skip over a few things. Like, for example, I can't really just spend another 10 minutes on exploring what BI and data science is. Maybe another time. It didn't make the cut today. So with that, building data with trust, right? That's the very title of this show. And why do you think that the biggest question I could ask you, so that we can then double and triple click in certain areas, why is trust so foundational in data success?
I mean, trust is everything. And when you're trying to grow a business, whether it's small, whether it's large, at the end of the day, you're trying to make the most informed decision as quickly as possible. And trying to do both of those two things, you need to have not only data to make informed decisions, but it needs to be really high quality data, that one that you can trust to be able to act quickly. I recall in my early career being in meetings where an executive would question a simple metric monthly active users. Be like, how come this number doesn't match monthly active users I just saw in my previous meeting? Just that one question alone kind of just derailed the entire meeting, and we went to this whole explanation of this metric here, this source here, and I'm sure many companies or data teams can maybe relate to this at some point in their journey to really be thinking about data quality. Is that if you're not addressing it, this will happen time and time again. And I recall it took many weeks, if not months, for that executive at that company that would challenge at the beginning of the meeting. He would actually manually reconcile himself just to make sure, and it was not only a waste of time, it doesn't feel great for everyone, but it erodes trust. That means that you're not providing value in spending time really, which is about the insights and the action versus, okay, is this metric right? And so just from that example, and there's a lot of other examples you can go to, some of the pitfalls of low data quality, but that's where fundamentally, no matter the size of your team, data quality has to be at the forefront of how you're thinking about building a data team. And having that high quality data allows folks to then very easily trust what's coming to them, whether it's in a presentation or consuming a dashboard. If they know they can trust it, then the focus is then on the action. And I think everyone can hopefully agree that that's where you want to spend your time, on the action part. And so high quality data will naturally always lead to more action more quickly. So that's why I get excited about data quality.
So also, and I think, I don't know, no one ever told me, but sometimes I'm mindful of when I make a case about, for example, how important adoption is of a data analytics solution, right? I tend to be intentionally provocative about digging into the obsession over data quality a little bit too much. Sometimes I look like I'm preaching you shouldn't care about your data quality, right? I definitely, I'm being just, this is a rhetorical tool merely from me. I completely understand the gravity and the foundational nature of data quality. Now, you guys are a digital native company. You're born with the data, you're born in data. What would you say that if someone says that, okay, this is very interesting and important for me, but actually my problem is that the data quality is just so low since we need to measure things that traditionally haven't been measured, and the data is kind of disjointed over the company. It's too big. It's like very, very difficult to change it. It causes all kinds of data quality issues. What is your kind of response to that and recommendation, even though you're at Turo, just focusing on the first principles, right? First principles are very powerful. So in this case, what is the first principle that you would still tell them to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, even though we are a very digital, mobile first company where we have a lot of this first party data that's easily kind of at our fingertips, there's some things that are still in question. Like, did we set up the tracking properly? We're moving quickly to launch new things, and so I think this is where there has to be kind of the data governance can be thrown around in a lot of different ways, but just being really thoughtful of how are you setting up, the right practices in place to be able to measure whether or not everything is flowing through as expected. Just as an example, and building in the kind of that into the culture. And sometimes that's not in the data team. This may be in the software development team that's setting up a new feature. Are they setting up the right tracking? Do we have that relationship with that team to be able to ask those questions and kind of come back to that? I think it goes back to then just making sure data is part of that conversation. And this is where, whether there's an accountability aspect or the collaboration aspect, there's a lot of different ways to kind of put this in place. And depending on the maturity of some of our teams, where they've been working with data teams maybe for 6 years and some for maybe 1 or 2 years, you can kind of see the difference there, where it's you need to kind of go on that journey with them and almost educate your stakeholders to understand why it's so important, and why they're also part of. It's not just okay, there's a data problem, I'm just going to throw it over to the data team. Sure, that might be the obvious thing to do, but everyone needs to be part of the solution here, and I think that kind of takes some time to build that relationship, which is, again, going back to the trust. You have to build those trust with your consumers, with your stakeholders, understanding the data, understanding how everything works. How do we know if there's something that's off? All of these components are, if you don't address them to begin with, you're just the same problems will keep coming back, and the pace at which you're providing impact is going to be significantly reduced.
So this is so cool because looking at as we started to talk about okay data quality, and then we're hitting on governance, and then we're hitting on literacy. So we will actually get to talk about some of that I intended originally, but not at that level. But the co-governance and literacy and quality question is actually something that's like very much a kind of like a hotly contested topic in
Mm-hmm.
general. And in that, I would have a question. So if and we're now looking at multiple playbooks from our other board of advisory members on how they think about, for example, data strategy. And
Sure.
Dejan Mitkovsky, who came on the podcast before, was with us in Austin. It will be in Nashville as well, presenting a story, VP of Data and Analytics at FanDuel. Also one of our board of advisory members, and he was kind of laying out the lessons learned from his experiences at, let's say, Google, but now at FanDuel, of how data and analytics success and the strategy is actually structured and the components of it, right? So here we're just, when we're talking about data quality, it's your way of like thinking about that too. And how do you see the importance and the role of, I'm just going to jump into the data literacy question. And I ask this because it's very new. So even in the data analytics conversation, data literacy as it is now as a term, it's not the oldest term. It's
Yeah,
not the
agreed.
oldest term. And that term is, from in many perspectives, are even being kind of contested. That should we even talk about it as data literacy? Should it be data fluency instead? This is a recurring. We can kind of discuss whether that's just semantics or more, or is it useful, right? The language around it. But what is your perspective on this, and maybe even the governance aspect of it? Because governance, when you have working governance, that kind of implies that there's a level of data fluency, data literacy in the business already, right?
Yeah, I think they're very tightly coupled together as I think about governance and literacy and or fluency. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, to me, data literacy is really about really for your stakeholders or kind of your end users. Do they understand the data and the insights that are being presented to them? And I think that can kind of go in a lot of different directions. But at its core, it's really just is in order for your consumers to understand the data. I think this comes back to the data quality has to be high. And quality here is really about accuracy, consistency. Is it being presented the same way? Do you have a metric or data dictionary where it's clear, where we're not calling different teams are calling the same metric different names? And you have to really be intentional and try to solve these things. It's easy to be like, oh, this team calls it this, we're going to call it this. Well, there's the proliferation then of metric names and terminology is incredibly important, and it saves you so much time if you can address it and just align and have those conversations up front, and then documenting that and making sure everyone is kind of adhering to that. And I know that adoption can be hard, but the more that you can kind of standardize the way, and this is why BI becomes something that I feel super passionate about, is that you need to make sure everyone is consuming information in a very consistent and structured way, so that it's very easy for them. They're not spending, they have to take a whole course just to understand how to read a dashboard. That's then no longer a dashboard. That's not serving the purpose of being able to provide those insights. And so I think this is where, if the more that you can start to talk about understanding the metrics and providing workshops even, and I think we've done this in the past where we've talked through certain metrics or certain dashboards and given folks the ability to do Q&A and have it a little bit more an opportunity and a discussion to be able to improve that data literacy. And the outcome of that is incredible, because then the end users are asking not only, oh, how do I read this chart, to, hey, I noticed this trend, and it's starting to then lead to conversations that are more business impacting, and then allowing us to double click into, is that then a bug? Is it some other thing that we need to address? Is it a new feature that we need to consider? Those are the right questions, and sometimes those are the hard questions, but we should be spending a lot more time on the hard questions, not, oh, okay, this is what the x-axis means and this is what the y-axis means. I think that's where you need to kind of help evolve your stakeholders and improve that literacy, so that it becomes more of the the whys and the so whats, as opposed to understanding just the chart itself. So
there's also like a fascinating conversation there about user-centric design in general, not
mhm.
even first specifically for data analytics, in general user-centric design, and how that
Yeah.
discipline itself is a beautiful infusion of these two disciplines. And I know because we did that, I think, 16 episode series with Dave Coughlin on advanced business communications and
Hmm.
storytelling, right?
Yeah.
Which encompasses I mean, probably the whole conversation is around 30 hours or something, so it's extremely robust. That was actually the basis of the advanced business communication and storytelling self-paced professional course that we have, but we're adding, because it's a constantly kind of updated corpus, we're adding one on user-centric design. We just need to say, yeah, okay, from everything that we explored with all the scenarios, strategic and communications, relationship building, visual storytelling, all that, user-centric design is just something that needs to happen there too. And it's very interesting that you said that, okay, if it needs lengthy explanation, then it doesn't serve the purpose anymore. It's not even a dashboard uh, anymore. So this kind of human-centric element of it is what
Hmm.
we see that often poses the barrier between really the people falling in love with data analytics, because that's what you want. Like, that's the ultimate goal, that they just love it. They love using it, because the fact that they actually love interacting with it is a major factor that's often overlooked. So how did
100%.
you perceive this to be some of the barriers when you try to like elevate your team's competence and ability to think about these problems the right way?
Yeah, I think this is where, again, being really intentional around how you're providing access to data, and we've had a lot of our different iterations of doing a lot of cleanup where, going without maintenance, the proliferation of dashboards and dashboards of dashboards and knowing where to find data. I mean, we're kind of getting back into, this is not a one solved once and you've solved it forever. It's something you have to constantly be doing. And I think that's something we've done a few times already, and where we're actually lining up to do yet another round of that cleanup, is just, again, being intentional of making sure you clean up so that whatever's out there, just like how we clean up our supply for our guest community, we need to make sure you're cleaning up your insights inventory for everyone, and making sure that, is it up to par? Is it the latest and greatest that they should be looking at? We could always do better in this front, but I'd say that's something that we've been trying to be as intentional as we can to make sure that that's accessible. The other aspect is then, especially when you're designing some things, and we actually have a set of dashboards for our host success team, and they're the ones that are actually having direct conversations with our some of our more productive hosts, and they need to have access to all of this data. But they were at, once upon a time, they were just going into wherever they can find multiple data sources, different dashboards in different places. Some of them would use it one way, some would use another way. And then, what's kind of embarrassing, but I'll say it now, is, in some cases they were taking screenshots of some dashboards and sharing it with the host, and it's like, well, is that the same thing that another host is getting? The experience was not there, and it was the data quality there. There's so many things in question. So we identified this as a huge challenge and problem, and redesigned the experience with a lot of their input. And so not only was this input from the host success team themselves on what are they trying to accomplish. It's not like, okay, let me just give you as much data as possible. That's not
Yeah,
going to solve
how
anything.
useful.
If
Yeah.
anything, it's going to be make it worse. It's like, what are we trying to accomplish, or what is the actual insights that we're trying to drive? And you can kind of start to say this is a little bit more into the storytelling aspect of, at the end of the day, where are you kind of taking the conversation, and do you have all the data components there in a consistent and accurate way so that they can flow through that? And now I'm really proud to say that we've designed that such of a dashboard experience where, is there a pricing problem for that host? They can talk through exactly what's happening. They can go through some benchmarking. They can go through all these things where even the hosts themselves, they are bought into exactly why they should listen to this recommendation, because now it's founded in data. They can actually see it, and it's consistent. And it's something that very recently we actually exposed, part of our data transparency efforts, some of these
Mhm.
tools directly to hosts, so that they actually can access this information themselves and be able to make data informed decisions, since we view them also as our customers. So yeah, it's been a journey, and I'd say there's always room for improvement. But I think that's one of the success stories I can share in terms of being able to transform the very disaggregated, decentralized way of accessing data, and really being thoughtful about it.
So I did not expect that we will have. For me, this is like a little gourmet example of data literacy, but a company kind of elevating the data literacy, not in the context of internal stakeholders and leadership teams and all that, but literally your customers who are also your business partners in a very interesting way. You guys are
Yeah,
business partners, right? That's in its essence, that's the relationship, but there's a value exchange, which is also a monetary value exchange. So in its very, very essence, it's not that much different than, let's say, our relationship with our own organizations, right? So
sure.
it's a fascinating example, and with the transparency bit too. So you see, I had this insight as well that right now, us talking about this and in this much depth, and the reason why it's so easy to talk about it is also because of transparency, right? So you intentionally created an environment in which transparency can emerge. It's very important because, again, just to kind of a little snapshot from, let's say, the advanced business communication series that we shot with Dave. So there, one of the approaches is about negotiation, but negotiation not in the classic way that you would think about negotiation, right? Negotiation in terms of how to find mutually beneficial solutions with a counterparty, right? Where you can create as much value as possible and can eliminate tripwires of that relationship. That's what it is, right? And that happens also on the communications front. And in its essence, again, you can dive into like all these, more technical elements of it, but at the foundational principle is that you need to create positive emotion in the relationship, right? And
Yes.
that positive emotion is generated by a balanced value exchange, right? But no party is like getting a much better part of the deal, right? So first of all, that's just general fairness, and those are also like long term. From a long term perspective, those are the more enduring relationships, anyways. So first principles, and another first principle is also that the fact that you can so with the positive emotion, like creating that positive emotion makes it easier for everyone to make good decisions. It just is, right?
Yeah.
When you are overwhelmed with negative emotion, like confusion or fear or concern or a lack of trust, your decision making ability goes down significantly. This is measurable, by the way. So this is not an
Yeah.
idea. This is the most empirically observable fact. So when that happens, when negative emotion is being generated in a relationship, then you're just putting unnecessary pressure on the success and the outcomes and the quality of the outcomes of that relationship, right? So introducing transparency in an intentional way is, I just think it's a beautiful example, because one of the things about data analytics, one of the main issues where the negative emotion can come from about data is the confusion. And what is data analytics anyways? And data security, privacy. So even the linguistic charge of some of these things for the lame
Yeah.
person can be a little bit like, that's not necessarily what I want to get involved with, right? It's very overwhelming and it's too much
Yeah.
data. People are not that statistically educated, right? So sure, I think most
Exactly.
people can differentiate an X and a Y axis, but you can't really go much further than that on that would eat up a lot of engagement credit, and it will be to the detriment of the the user experience. So this whole transparency part is, especially even now, you being able to talk about these things is also for Turo as an organization and for our customers too. It's like, oh, this is an excellent data practice over at Turo. It's a very important thing, right, for Turo to have, because of the customers that you have and the data that you have and the product that you offer. So I'm enjoying the conversation even just from that perspective, right? So how transparency
Yeah.
is just through and through this dialogue. So because I'm also mindful of the time, right? And we managed to get into the playbook. I think already we gained some really cool angles on data quality, governance, literacy, and now also transparency. So with regards to transparency, are there any other expressions of transparency in your leadership playbook where you can see a relevant connection?
Yeah, I think the two angles that I always think through this is, again, internally and externally. So internally, again, this goes back to having really high quality dashboards and information that's accessible to everyone. You're not gatekeeping. Okay, I don't want someone to not see this metric because it's not doing so well. Like, we do not believe in that at all. We need to make sure everyone is being able to see how the business is doing from a 360 perspective and being able to drill down to a decent enough level to be able to understand what's happening and then be able to ask those questions. And then we can always take that the next step further of then doing some analysis or some understand type of analysis to then do a readout where, again, there's a lot more transparency of then this is why this is happening and then explaining that. Externally, I think this is where, at least historically for Turo, and I could probably make the assumption that even externally, there's not a lot of effort or the thought of there's a lot of fear of sharing data externally with your customers. And I think there's the basic element of ratings and reviews is an easy one that a lot of companies do. And I think it's something that makes any marketplace better because then you can see qualitative and quantitative data of, okay, this is a 5-star car, or this is what some of the guests are actually saying about the experience. And that's helpful to empower the guests to be able to say, okay, yes, I want to book this car, or maybe this car is not for me. But on the host side, this is where I think we saw this as a missed opportunity on the transparency front, is that we were sharing a lot of information of, as a host, this is how much money you've made from all the trips you've booked. That's great, but that's not any new information. They get their bank account. They know how much earnings they're
They
generating.
already have
So
access
it's
to
not
that
like
data.
they have access to that. What they didn't have access to was, well, how am I competing against other people in my area? And that's more important because then am I sure? I know I'm generating, and I list actually one of my cars on Turo, and some months I'm generating $800 a month. I'm offsetting the cost of car ownership, which is great. And now, but I question am I doing as good or better than some of the competition in my area? And that's never been available. And that level of transparency is something that we just recently unlocked over the past 2 years for our power host community, which are our most kind of productive hosts, but providing them that level of transparency so they could see for every individual car, for similar cars or the exact same make model, we're giving them all this transparency of this is how much the average earnings is. This is what they're pricing it at. And it allows them to be able to very quickly identify with some basic visualization of, here are my underperforming cars. I need to take action. And here are some ones that are doing great. Just keep at it. Do I need to buy more of these cars? And so it starts to just give them the right information of questions they've been asking for years, but they didn't have the data to do this. They would just kind of go off of intuition or just based off of their own interpretation of their data. But we have this data. Why not share it with them? And I think that's something that, again, I've been super passionate about. I think we've just scratched the surface with this, but I think there's so much more to be able to then empower them to make the right decisions. Again, it's a win-win. If they're doing better to manage their business and scale it, that means the guests win. And if the guests win, our hosts win, Turo also wins. So again, data providing so much value, but it's a matter of just making sure you present it in a way where it is more easy to make those actions. Again, that's where we try to have to be really thoughtful instead of like, here's a bunch of data in a database and go figure it out. That's not going to help a lot of these entrepreneurs who are a lot of data-minded folks, but they're not data scientists. They are legitimately building small businesses, and they need to not spend time mining through data or going through their own spreadsheets. They need to be able to come up, hopefully, to a point where we're giving them more prescriptive analytics of, hey, we noticed these trends. This is what you should do to scale your business. We haven't gotten 100% of the way there, but that's kind of the vision of where we think it's going to be really, really exciting, where we can more proactively nudge them based off all this data, show them the evidence, have them take action. And at some point, would be really delicious. Then they just click a button and we've integrated to our product to be able to take the actions very, very quickly at a click of a button. We're not there yet, but that's kind of the vision of where data transparency can go. And I think thinking about it externally is, I don't think a lot of people think about it that way from a data standpoint. So
This is exactly what I talk about when I mention that when you solve some foundational, really painful problems in data and data transformation, all that does is that it earns you bigger and better things to work on, and the next challenge and
Absolutely.
the next challenge, right? So even as you're describing this, you're obviously like deeply passionate about it and deeply involved in it, and you live it and breathe it. Even when you're away on vacation, finally you have some space to think about it too because you just love it. I know the feeling, and with that. So the case studies here that show that hey, you can actually like identify some of these opportunities and create value through some foundational principles that are aimed and dialed to have the most business value, the most user value, the most human value, right? Because that's at the end of the day, when I say those things, they are on the same axis, right? They are just
Yes.
that's how they amplify each other, right? I mean, because you guys are a business who provide a service and value to human beings, and I love that we get to have this conversation right now because while you were talking about Turo itself, I also found it fascinating that why is that the idea of Turo just came about? Because there might have been previous attempts at something similar. It wouldn't be the first
Sure.
example because most of those companies probably don't survive a year. They can't get through a seed. They can't just they fall apart in the second, third year because so many pitfalls. 99% of startups fail in the first year. This is a real stat. 99%
Yeah.
in the first year. It's a high percentage. And all those that don't fail, the 1%, right? Those are also people who already tried another failed venture in the past. It's like so much failure involved with that.
Absolutely.
But you
Absolutely.
guys kind of caught everything at the right time, so the right person was doing the right thing at the right time in the right environment. Where suddenly the question of okay, we've been renting homes or we've been renting, let me say, accommodation for a long, long time. That's like an old ancient thing, right? There were
Sure. Yeah.
inns
Yeah.
even in ancient times. And then, of
Absolutely.
course, that in and of itself evolved all the way to this historical point when Airbnb came about, and people were like, "What?" Right? So now it's just hotels are competing with Airbnb again. We're living through that area. And I can tell you
Yeah.
that's real. For a while, Airbnb dominated hotels. Hotels are back in the game. I'm reporting from the front line
Hmm.
as a customer, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. And now Turo just showed up in a moment where the question of, hey, why can't you do this with your car, right? Because the car is a different thing for everyone. Cars are a very unique asset that every person has, right? It's
Absolutely.
in
Yeah.
an interesting way. It's personal, but in a different way than home, right? So
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
so interesting, the whole automotive industry. Also, one of our member companies is Cox Automotive. Their VP of Data Science, Jody Blumberg, just came on the podcast. One of our longtime member had a fascinating conversation around the idea was that the Gen AI checks are coming due. What can you do about it, and how can you make sure that your checks will not bounce, right? So this whole idea to kind of the whole Gen AI hype, but from that angle, right? So the automotive industry itself is fascinating in that sense, and the whole idea that the whole thing is based on transparency too. You can kind of look at playbooks from previous companies like Airbnb and kind of focus on those success stories and make them happen. So for example, even for you, right, I imagine that one of the most interesting things is digging deeper into, for example, what Airbnb did, but that was a different time, that was a different place, that was a different technological stage of evolution with like
Sure.
everything, but kind of implement those ideas. I get why you are so pumped about it. It sounds like you guys have a really cool job with this over at Turo.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Again, like I mentioned before, no shortage of interesting problems to solve.
Yeah.
And just being a marketplace, so much in the supply demand side and the intersection of that risk. It's so fun.
And
I
look,
definitely feel lucky.
and I would love to continue, and probably we will continue this conversation in one shape or form, right? And we'll try to capture as much of it for the generations to come as possible. But I can't guarantee that. This was a fascinating conversation. I know that we got to land the plane, so I want to be respectful of your time as well. I know that you're just kind of transitioning back into work life after a big trip. So with this, the whole storytelling element, we'll need to save it for another day, another conversation. But I immensely enjoyed exploring this story so far. So thank you, Albert, for all the insights and more to come.
My pleasure. Great chatting with you, Laszlo, as always, and look forward to continuing the conversation, which I know can go for many more hours. We'll try to keep it more succinct.
And I'm sure we will.